So today we're going to be finding area of rectangles. And first, let's briefly talk about what area is. So if we were looking at a figure like this, and it's covered with squares on the inside, and I asked you, hey, tell me how many squares are inside this figure. A quick way to do that would be to count how many are, in rows, and then how many are in columns, and then multiply that together. So if you were really fast, you'd say, well, there's 2 here, and there's 5 squares here. So if I multiply that together, 2 times 5, there are 10 squares inside of this figure. This is exactly what we're going to do with area. Area is the number of square units needed to cover a surface. We're not talking about going around the outside of the figure. We're talking about the inside of the figure. You can think of area as being covering, like floor covering or wall covering, but area is definitely covering. So today we're going to be finding the area just of rectangles. Now, a rectangle is a quadrilateral, meaning it has 4 sides, and the opposite sides are parallel and congruent. Now, they give a formula here in these notes that I'm not particularly fond of because it does not match what is on your reference materials on the star chart. So let's look at that instead. So on the reference materials for the star chart, we also call this the math chart, there's a section just for area. And we have 3 figures here, and the middle one is rectangle or parallelogram. This can also be used for squares, because remember, a square is a special type of rectangle. And the formula is area equals base times height. So here's our first rectangle, and when you're finding area, the first thing you need to do is write down your formula. This is a rectangle, so I'm going to use the rectangle formula. Area equals base times height. Yes, you need to do this every single time. So the next thing you need to do is identify your base and your height. Base and height are always connected by a right angle. All the angles in a rectangle are right, so excuse me, we know that 19 feet is the base and 4.2 feet is the height. So now we're going to rewrite our formula using those 2 numbers. And I'm using parentheses to show multiplication. So now I'm going to go off to the side here and do my multiplication somewhere else. I want to keep my process organized. I want to keep my formula organized, so I'm going to keep it separate from my actual calculations. So we have 4.2 times 19. That's 18, 36, 37. 1 times 2 is 2, and then 4, 9, and then 7. There's 1 decimal place in my factors, so there's 1 decimal place in my product. So my area, come back over here to my step-by-step, where my formula is, my area is equal to 79.8, and then don't forget your units once you get done. It's feet squared. Why is it feet squared? Because we're talking about 2-dimensional objects, or figures. We're talking about figures that have base and height, 2 dimensions. Also remember that area is the number of squares that fit inside of a figure. So that's why our units are squared. Let's do another. Here's a nice square. Again, my formula is, if you don't believe me, base times height. So area equals base times height. Now let's label our base and our height. Base is 6.7 and height is 6.7, which is kind of obvious because a square, all the sides are congruent. They're all the same. So even if they only tell you one side, you still know what all the others are because all the sides on a square are congruent. Now let's rewrite our formula with our numbers. 6.7 times 6.7. Again, rewrite the formula each time. Write down your steps. Write down your process. The steps are embedded in these formulas, ladies and gentlemen, and you should use them to help you keep track of what you're doing. Then come over to another sheet of paper and do your actual calculations. 42, 46, 40. There's 2 decimal places in my factors, so I have 2 decimal places in my product. So my area, coming back over here, area is equal to 44.89. Don't forget your units. It's centimeters squared. All right, so that's 2 examples of how to find the area of rectangles. If you need more examples in class, let me know. Bye.